Well, Kevin Hollingrake is the Shadow Housing Secretary. He's a member of Kemi Badenoch's top team. She will be preparing at the moment for Prime Minister's questions. Kevin, thank you for taking time to speak to us today. We just have a bit of breaking news that I can perhaps ask your thoughts on. This is Rotherham rapists who groomed and attacked vulnerable teenage girls they called fresh meat, are jailed for a total of nearly 40 years. This is Romulad Stefan Hopothet and Absalom Sigoyo, who groomed and raped girls who were vulnerable in the extreme, have been jailed at Sheffield Crown Court for 20 years and 18.5 years respectively. The court was told during a 5-week trial how the girls were sexually assaulted several times a week over a period of 6 months in the South Yorkshire town by a gang of men who referred to them as fresh meat. I mean, this is just appalling. Has justice been served here, Kevin?
Well, good morning, Peter. What a terrible, disgraceful series of events. It doesn't sound long enough for that kind of horrendous treatment of young people. And it reinforces the case, I think, for the national inquiry we've been calling for. It's not just to establish how and why this happened and the culture in some of those communities, but it's all about who knew what, and was there a deliberate attempt to conceal what was happening and to turn a blind eye to it. That's what we'd like to see, because then perhaps people can be held to account, but also we won't make the same mistakes again. And we've learned an awful lot here, but it just is unthinkable what's happened to these young girls.
Kevin, thanks for your reaction just to that breaking news that has come in. Just to say those rapists in Rotherham there who groomed and attacked vulnerable teenage girls have been jailed for a total of 40 years. Thank you for your reaction to that. I want to ask you about a number of things, Kevin. One of them is, of course, what's likely to come up at Prime Minister's question time about the defence budget. We know that a number of Labour backbenchers are going to talk about the fact that the defence budget has gone up, the aid budget has gone down. That's something Kemi Badenoch says that she supports the Prime Minister with, but aren't you worried that Britain's sort of the view of other countries of Britain abroad, the work that has been done with international aid, will be lost as a result of this?
Well, I, like the opposition, I'm worried more than anything about the security of our nation and the citizens within it. That's our primary responsibility. So absolutely, the reason you have aid budgets is for our soft power, but sometimes hard power is much more important than soft power right now. And so I fully support what the Prime Minister did in terms of getting to 2.5% by 2027. But we need to go further than that. We need to get to 3% of GDP. These are very difficult times, worrying times. So we need to accelerate our spend on defence, replenish our own resources due to the supplies, military aid we provided to Ukraine, continue to provide that, but also make sure we've got the resources we need to keep this country safe.
Given what President Trump said last night in his address to Congress, do you feel we are closer to peace in Ukraine?
Well, I hope so. And I think Kemi Badenoch's doing the right thing in trying not to inflame the situation. And indeed, the Prime Minister did similar, I think. But so I think the most important thing is some calm heads, be sensible about this, try and look for the common ground and try and make sure we get to a position where we can have a peace negotiation that's in Ukraine's interests. That's the vital thing here. This is not about just doing a deal for a deal's sake. It's about making sure Ukraine is treated well and fairly. It's very important that Ukraine takes part in those negotiations. No one would be against a ceasefire, but the ultimate peace deal has got to be in the interest of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people.
There's a number of stories around today I'd quite like to ask you about, specifically about an alleged cabinet revolt over the net zero pledge. Is Ed Miliband perhaps going in one direction? Rachel Reeves, as she prepares for the spring statement later this month, going in a different one, taking perhaps Jonathan Reynolds and maybe even the Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer, Morgan McSweeney, with her. This is a policy that originally under Theresa May was put through with not a huge amount of debate. There were successive governments have pledged to net zero, but the wheels seem to be falling off here. The practicalities of net zero don't seem to be working in the way that people want them to. Can you understand the problems here, and do you think the Conservative Party will perhaps think again?
Well, there's a real split in the cabinet, isn't there? I mean, you've got the ideology of Ed Miliband heading off in one direction, and you've got the the panic-stricken Rachel Reeves thinking, oh my God, I've got to do anything to stimulate growth, having completely wrecked growth, economic growth in this country by talking the country down, the economy down for 7 or 8 months, and then hitting business with £25 billion of tax rises, which she said she wouldn't do. So this is why growth has stalled, and it has. We're the fastest growing economy in the G7. We're now the slowest growing economy in the G7. And she's trying to find any way to stimulate growth. I do think we have to take a pragmatic approach to decarbonisation. We cannot have the most expensive energy in Europe. We've got to move to a cheaper energy mix. That's why we relaxed the rules around oil and gas extraction and licenses. We granted 100 new oil and gas licenses in 2023 to make sure we weren't overly dependent on expensive renewables. It was a case, the expense on renewables isn't just about the generation, it's also the intermittency, which then means you've got to have lots of backup resources to be able to batteries and the like, which costs a lot of money. Those grid connections cost a lot of money. So we've got to do this with a smooth glide path. And this is what the opposition has said. It's no good just setting an objective at 2050. You've got to work out how we're going to get there and make sure as you get there, as we become a nation that's less dependent on fossil fuels, we do it in a way that is affordable for businesses.
Kevin, we've just had some figures come into the building now. 326 Channel migrants arrived yesterday on 6 small boats. We know that 1,168 migrants have arrived in March so far, 3,224 since the start of the year, and 26,466 migrants have arrived since Starmer became Prime Minister. Your party colleagues didn't get a grip on this. Rishi Sunak, in fact, has spoken today about how stopping the boats was the wrong phrase to use, but it doesn't seem Starmer is either.
Well, the way we were going to deal with this is Rwanda. That was the right thing to do. Okay, we might have not managed expectations properly, but it was still the right strategy. If you say to people, if they come to the UK, they can't stay in the UK and claim asylum, you're going to go to a third country, a safe third country, which in our case, our plan was Rwanda. What happened then, of course, is the Labour Party voted against those plans 132 times in Parliament.
Would Kemi Badenoch still send people to Rwanda today? If Kemi Badenoch was Prime Minister, Rwanda would be back on the agenda, would it?
We are very clear there will be a solution which will include a third country, a safe third country, whether that's Rwanda or a different one, but nevertheless, the principle is the same. People want to come to the UK because they like what the UK has to offer them. And let's look at this. Not all these people arriving are seeking asylum. Lots of these people are economic migrants. So if you say to those people, I'm sorry, the UK cannot be a solution to every single person who's unhappy with life in their own country, that if you come to here by those means, which we declared illegal, which the government's now reversed, then you'll go to a safe third country, and that will deter people making that journey in the first place.
What do you make of the news today that almost 1 million people in England speak little or no English?
It's appalling. I mean, that's simply wrong, and that's why our new plans to make sure that people cannot apply for citizenship for 15 years, it's currently 6, raising the bar to entry to this country, raising the bar in terms of
many of those people came in during the Conservative period of office previously and couldn't speak English. I mean, that was a failing of the last government, wasn't it?
Yes, we made mistakes. There's no doubt about it. And we made mistakes on migration. We should say, hold our hands up when we get things wrong. We did introduce English tests and raise the standard of those, but you still got lots of young people coming with people on visas, dependents. That's where I think a lot of this problem is arising from. So we recognise that. We changed the rules while we were in office, which would have reduced those numbers significantly. For instance, one of the things we did is raise the salary threshold for people coming to the UK up to £38,000. Labour's now reversed that, dropped it back to £26,000. So that will be a higher number of migrants because of that. Yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we corrected them. Labour's now reversing those changes.
OK, Kevin, thank you very much. That's Kevin Hollingreich there. He's the Shadow Housing Secretary. He's on the Conservative front bench. On the way to Prime Minister's questions, which we'll review in about an hour's time with Theo Usherwood. We'll bring you the highlights of that. Lots to discuss there. Claire, what did you make of that interview?
Interesting that you couldn't get him to suggest that Rwanda would be on the table if Kemi Badenoch was Prime Minister.
A third country. So,
a safe third country. So I think they had perhaps seen that Rwanda wasn't the deterrent and it was never going to work in the first place, and we all kind of got stuck with it. I think they did as well, but they still chucked a lot of money at that particular problem for nothing.
Yeah.